This is a seated flat in hand position 1. The seated flat is the most basic movement in a spinning program and the foundation from which you develop your cycling technique. The cadence range for a seated flat is 80 to 110 RPM. Even though it's a simulation of a flat road, you want to put some resistance on the flywheel to simulate riding outdoors where you would feel road surfaces, headwinds, and resistance from the gear you're riding in. To ride with proper form in a seated flat, sit on the widest part of the saddle with your shoulders relaxed, your elbows slightly flexed, and your head aligned with your spine. Your hips should be stable or quiet in the saddle. You can also ride a seated flat in hand position 2, which will open up your chest and allow you to breathe more deeply. For that reason, you should ride in hand position 2 when your intensity or effort is increased. You can also choose hand position 2 whenever it feels more comfortable. Before coming out of the saddle to a standing flat, be sure you have moderate resistance on the flywheel to support your body weight. While in hand position 2, stand up on the pedals with your weight balanced over the center of the bike. Be sure not to lean onto the handlebars. This movement is a training technique used to build leg strength and trunk stability. As with the seated flat, you want your shoulders relaxed, elbows slightly flexed, and your head aligned with your spine. Your hips remain level as your legs complete smooth, fluid pedal strokes. The cadence range for a standing flat is 80 to 110 RPM. However, if you're just starting out and building strength, a cadence as low as 70 RPM is fine. Focus on your form and technique, and you'll be able to build up to a higher cadence in time. Jumps are used as a drill to practice smooth transitions between the seated and standing positions. When performed correctly, this helps to develop strength and coordination. Before trying jumps, be sure you're proficient in the seated and standing flats, because jumps are a fusion of those two movements. While in hand position 2, transition smoothly from the saddle to a standing flat position. Focus on using your legs to lift you up and out of the saddle, rather than pulling on the handlebars as you stand. Balance your weight over the center of the bike and be sure that you don't lean onto the handlebars. Maintain a smooth, fluid pedal stroke throughout the movement. Continue to transition between seated and standing at a pace at which you can maintain your form and alignment. When climbing hills on a spinner bike, we turn the resistance knob to increase the effort required to turn the pedals. The more resistance you add, the steeper the hill you're simulating. Your pedal stroke will naturally slow down since it's more difficult to turn the pedals. The cadence range for a seated climb is 60 to 80 RPM. Sit back in the saddle with a light grip in hand position 2. Keep your shoulders relaxed and your elbows slightly flexed. When the hill gets very challenging, you may find yourself shrugging your shoulders and squeezing the handlebars. If this happens, relax and use your breath to help release that tense energy. Your upper body should remain supple as your legs power through the pedal strokes. When a hill gets really steep, we climb it out of the saddle in hand position 3. This movement will help you develop power. Your hips will be flexed a bit more than in a standing flat, and you may even feel the tip of the saddle brush against your inner thighs. While standing, your body weight assists in turning the pedals, but you still want to maintain smoothness and fluidity. Allow your body weight to naturally shift from side to side, but avoid stomping on the pedals or exaggerating the swaying motion. The cadence range for a standing climb is the same as for a seated climb, 60 to 80 RPM. When we transition from a seated flat to a standing flat, we call that jumps. And similarly, jumps on a hill is a transition from a seated climb to a standing climb. Cyclists would do this to suddenly accelerate and break away from the pack or to power up a switchback. In the spinning program, we take this movement and repeat it as a drill to develop coordination and to increase the intensity for advanced riders. With heavy resistance on the flywheel, start out in a seated climb hand position 2 and transition to a standing climb hand position 3, one hand at a time. When standing, be sure that you don't lean onto the handlebars. Maintain a smooth, fluid pedal stroke throughout the movement. Continue to transition between seated and standing at a pace at which you can maintain your form and alignment. Running with resistance is like running up a hill with moderate resistance, not as heavy as in a standing climb. The body position is similar to a standing flat and also uses hand position 2. This is an advanced technique for riders who can perform a standing flat with good form and are ready for an increased challenge. While balancing your weight over the center of the bike, grip lightly on the handlebars, relax your shoulders, and hold your head in line with your spine. Because it's a hill, the cadence range is 60 to 80 RPM. If you find yourself stomping or forcing very hard into the downward pedal stroke, be sure to take some resistance off and maintain proper form. A sprint is an advanced technique that's very intense. Many people think that a sprint means to move your legs as fast as you can, perhaps because that's what it means in the sport of running. To a cyclist, a sprint is a way to get to the finish line as fast as possible, which requires a big gear. So on a spinner bike, you simulate a sprint by adding a lot of resistance to the flywheel. Then you explode out of the saddle into hand position 3 with all the leverage and power you can generate. Once you break the gear and smooth out your pedal stroke, you sit back in the saddle, hand position 2, and keep up the cadence. You should be exerting as much power as you possibly can, and therefore a sprint only lasts for 20 to 30 seconds. Your cadence should never exceed 110 RPM, and for many people it won't be over 100 RPM. If you're pedaling any faster than that, turn up the resistance, which is like shifting to a higher gear on a road bike. Remember, the goal of a sprint is to get you to the finish line as fast as possible, which requires a big gear. Sprinting with heavy resistance is also necessary for safety reasons, so that you stay in control of the flywheel at all times. A sprint on a hill is a similar technique, but with even more resistance to simulate hill climbing. As with other climbing movements, the cadence range is 60 to 80 RPM. You can start either in or out of the saddle with heavy resistance. For the sprint effort, you explode out of the saddle, out to hand position 3, and push hard for 15 to 20 seconds. Because sprints will cause your heart rate to increase very rapidly, it's only recommended for those who are very fit and experienced on the bike.